We're underway.
It's good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel, and I thought we'd start today, given it's AFLW finals. John, from where you sit, how's the publicity been so far?
I have to say pretty ordinary, Professor. I've long said that whilst I am a great supporter of the women's game, it's not my cup of tea, but it certainly is a cup of tea for a lot of people, as you have your cup of tea there. And I just think those that support the AFLW have been badly let down by the lack of publicity given to it. Now, I know it's a bit on, but there was always going to be a bit on when they set this fixture. So there's no excuses for it. We all love our football, and anything to keep football in front of the public is a good thing. And I just think it's been ordinary, to say the least.
The reason I asked, Judge, was because I did my usual review of the dailies and looked at the Age online Thursday. There wasn't one story about AFLW or the finals, but you could find what I would call a puff piece, if you like, about journalists talking about what might happen in the AFL in 2023.
Yeah, it's the old trope, Professor, and I've said this before, and I'm getting more and more antsy about the whole thing. I honestly think the women's game should stop hanging off the coattails of the men's game. And I've seen Nicole Livingstone as an article in the Australian yesterday about where it's all going, and you'd have to say it's where she sees it going is as a byproduct of the men's game, and they're she's starting to sound like a CEO, to be honest. All of that BS bingo, but they're talking about the metrics that they've got, and they're surprised that the supporters of the men's teams aren't necessarily transplanting over to the women's game. And to me, that's no surprise at all. I've always thought there are two entirely different markets, and the AFLW should glorify its own uniqueness. It's a women's game, and get away from the men's game. So I just a little thing, Professor. I checked out the AFLW jumpers and their sponsors, and it seems to be almost exclusively the men's sponsors. Now, why is that the case? Why aren't they being sponsored by other companies who'd like to see the women's game as being something which suits their image?
It was good to see Nicole Livingstone. I'd forgotten what she looks like, but it was good to see her there.
Yeah, well, Paul, your league is, I see you're getting 4 more teams in the NRLW next year, so you'll have 10. And there's
each team will play each other once. You're an egalitarian, and the most important thing, each team is based on a supply of players and an area that's screaming out for the team. No comment on Western Sydney, but I simply say that they are 4 strong areas for league. Canberra speaks for itself. The Cronulla area where I grew up, 400,000 plus people there. OzTag, for example, numbers are through the roof. North Queensland Cowboys, don't need to tell you how strong a league area that is. And the West Tigers, which is still a hardcore area for rugby league and expands out westward. So all of those teams will have a supporter base. Most importantly, they're not just being added because we better put them in, hang on a second, and we'll grow for the sake of it.
And that's a critical difference, I think, between the AFLW and NRLW. You guys have done it in a strategic way. You said, where's the demand? Let's go and fill that demand. Rather than the AFL saying, well, it'll create, the AFLW saying, well, we'll create our own demand because of the fact that people will see their men's team and they'll automatically jump onto the women's team. No, I never thought that would happen, and it hasn't happened.
It's interesting that your point, and I don't want to say that they should be piggybacking off the men's game, but they generally set the games up around when the crowds will be there and the interest is there for the men's game. So what they're generally having is a combination of the two, and perhaps that's due to the fact it's a 2-hour game and not 3 hours like AFL. But there's a window there where you've got league fans engaged, you've physically got them present at venues and on their butt in front of the TV screen. And they're, I wouldn't say piggybacking, but they're running it at a time when the window's open for viewers.
Whereas in my mind, and it's pretty Sarah's on here today, I'd love to talk to you about this, but in my mind, the women's game can create a whole new culture, a bit of a, I wouldn't say cult following, but some of the players have got a bit of a cult following at grounds like Victoria Park, Port Melbourne, suburban grounds that hold, 5 to 10,000 people, and you get a real buzz out of those games rather than playing at a 40,000 person venue where, you're rattling inside. It just hasn't got the same atmosphere.
Well, the other thing, Judge, is Paul sent that article around that the NRL sent out in June 2022. What the NRLW has is certainty. They know when their season starts in 2023. They know how many teams, they know how many rounds, they know exactly everything they need to know. The players all know what's going on. Compare that to Libby Birch's article in The Age this week, where she's talking about uncertainty. That she doesn't know of any long-term strategy. She's trying to work out how players whose contracts finish this year, we don't know what the road looks like. How can that possibly? And then she said and she put it quite well, what grinds her gears is that the AFL men's dates are released firmly in advance. And why are the women left to make it up on the run? It's season 7. And as I said last week, surely there's got to be some difference sooner or later.
I actually think the AFLW should actually literally break away from the men's competition, be set up in a different building, in a whole different structure with different people running it. They look after their own sponsorship, and they have their own season when they want to, where they want to. I think that'll be, the AFL wouldn't like that because the AFL controls everything down to the Manangatang thirds. Everything is controlled by the AFL, and I think that's the real problem for the women's game. Nicole Livingston, I think, seems to be dictated to by the AFL. It's the impression that I get. And unless they actually physically break away from the AFL, I just think we're going to have this year after year, Professor. But it's not getting much better. We've been talking about this ever since the whole thing started, about this lack of certainty, and just seems to be decision-making on the run.
The final started on Friday night, and a question for the panel. Which team that could have had a home ground advantage didn't get selected to play at their home ground? There was only one of them out of the whole 4 games.
Geelong?
No, Melbourne.
Oh.
Melbourne were asked to play at Princes Park on Friday night against Adelaide. Let me tell you, if they were doing that because they thought there'd be a big crowd, it was the greatest non-event of all time.
What was the crowd like, Professor?
Terrible.
Yeah.
Is that just protecting the MCG for the World T20 finals, Professor?
No, they should have played it at Casey, Gelding.
Hey?
They should have played it at Casey.
Mate, they would have been blown away from Casey.
Well, but that's where their home ground is. Well, how come they finished second on the ladder and not... Brisbane played at home. Geelong played at GmbH, and Collingwood are playing at Victoria Park. For whatever reason, and there was no reason given for it. For whatever reason, the AFLW decided that Melbourne and Adelaide would be played at Princes Park on Friday night. Adelaide don't have a huge following in Melbourne, and of course there wasn't a big crowd. So to put a game like it, look, the optics were terrible. I got some texts about it didn't look good, and it didn't. And let me tell you, GMHBA Stadium looked even worse last night because they must have had all the people who were spectating on the camera side of the ground because it was just empty seats in a 35,000 seat stadium.
Well, Professor, that was the same with the Brisbane game. I noticed the official crowd was 2,392. You couldn't tell with the coloured seats where they were.
It made the Sheffield Shield crowds look like a New Delhi bus.
It reminds you of the old VFA days. where one person had two heads.
Gelding, did you watch yesterday's game? Your Tigers?
Bits of it, Professor.
And
we had the grandkids.
And what did you think?
Beaten by a lot better side on the day. We need a few more avenues to goal rather than one person kicking 3 goals for the game and one person being your sole goal kicker.
Well, that'd be Katie Brennan for the Tigers.
It was Katie Brennan, yes.
And that's also...
but a good improvement by Richmond this year to be there, and they've got the double chance, so we'll see what happens.
Professor, the North Melbourne-Geelong game, I think there was no goals kicked after quarter time. And I just wonder whether that's starting to become, or has been a problem for a while. But is this low scoring becoming a real problem for the AFLW?
It could be. I watched some of it last night, and I've got to say that Geelong in the third quarter had 10 consecutive inside 50s and didn't score. And the reason they didn't score was because every time they kicked it inside the 50, they kicked it straight to a North Melbourne player.
Yeah.
Now, I watched a lot of the game last night, and I've got to say the skill level for a final was pretty poor.
And this is my problem, Professor, and it highlights to why supporters of the men's game aren't necessarily supporters of the women's game. They're two entirely different games, and the skill standard, I think, is just it's remarkable. I'd be surprised if the top women's teams could beat the say Victorian under-18 boys team.
Yeah, look, I don't know that it's a comparison. I think people expect at the top professional level for there to be a fair amount of skill in the game. And at times, last night's game at Geelong, and I'll make allowances for it being at night and maybe a little bit dewy, it looked like rugby union at times, with the ball just sort of mass players and bodies going from one spot to another, and the ball was forced forward rather than taken forward by kicking by foot or hand. Kicks off the ground, tapping the ball ahead, 4 or 5 bodies on the ground. Yeah, it wasn't a good spectacle.
Can I just clarify that you said it looked like rugby union or league? Because I have had friends who are union fans who've described AFL as being like chasing around a pig in the mud, because just no one could pick it up and it's just everyone's falling over, and it can be a bit Benny Hill. No,
it was like union. Look, the only thing that saved that game last night was it was so close.
And the soccer score almost, I've seen. But anyway.
Well, 2 goals for doesn't make for attractive football, does it, Professor?
No, and
when you kick 2, if you're going out and you say we're going to win the game by kicking 2 goals for, that's a bit of a detriment to the game. Like, I like the way that the women's football is developing, and the skills are getting a lot better, and some of the games are quite attractive to watch. But when there is a bad one, like with anything, any type of sports level, it opens it up for a little bit of criticism. And maybe the scoring is something that they may have to look at to increase it. So I don't know what that would be, but if you're getting a 10-goal game, winning score, that would be attractive football.
The one problem that they've got, and especially it's highlighted in a game last night, Judge, and that's where coaches put 1 behind the ball or 2 behind the ball. The 6-6-6 only operates after a goal scored. So if there's no goal scored, then both teams for 3 quarters of the game had 1 and 2 behind the ball. Therefore, you can't move. They just haven't got the skill to evade that second or third person extra behind the ball, and that was proven.
It's certainly a feature.
Just using that number there, be careful using that number, the 3 6s, Professor, because ScoMo just dropped out, and the former head of the NAB just dropped out as well. So just be careful with your numbers if you don't mind.
It's certainly a feature of the game, the women's game, that it's defensive, Professor. And the defensive skills and the tackling is, it's out of this world, though. They're fantastic. But that's just the way the game has developed thus far. I agree with Gelding. Give it 10 years, it'll be entirely different product. But I go back to saying that I think the women's game should develop in its own way and develop its own fan base from the ground up, rather than say, well, we'll take all of those 100,000 members of Collingwood, thanks, and they'll be our members. Doesn't work that way.
I do have to say one positive as well from the article. I'm not making comparisons, but really pleasing from the review of the women's game in the rugby league is there's a significant number of the athletes who are making it a full-time profession. So it's great for the skill levels, and it's fantastic that there's enough investment in the game that can happen. I'm not sure the numbers on the AFL women's side, but that can only be great for the game if these players can. I mean, I remember back in the 80s with rugby league, the men's game, that they'd have their occupation on the screen in the midweek cup, and it'd often be garbologist or whatever you like. But that was back when they didn't have to play full time. But the professionalism of the men's game now is off the charts, and it's fantastic that a growing number of women are able to be professionals in rugby league.
I noticed that, Paul, from this other article I read about the NRLW, that in fact a number of the players are now professional rugby league players, which I must say I was surprised by.
Yeah, and that's coming on the back of sponsorship. They do say women hold the purse strings. It's growing in households, and advertisers are flocking to this product because it's high skill and it's got women in charge.
Well, it goes back to my point about the jumpers in the AFLW. They're just borrowing the sponsorship of their male counterparts. And I just would have thought that it's such an attractive product for sponsors, women's sport generally, that I'm surprised they haven't gone to the market far more.
If you look at the scoring, Judge, I was just having a look at the games. The highest score in the 3 games to date is 48.
Yeah.
48. And the second highest score is 39. So I think they've got a bit to do with trying to encourage scoring more in the game.
Yeah.
Well, Presser, if you look at all 3 games, I think the total's about 164 points. That's out of 3 games, 6 sides have only kicked that in the whole thing. So, as you said, there is certainly, and coaches will always do it, and it's more than their entitlement to do it, is to protect, to make sure that these games don't blow out. But as you said, it doesn't make for an attractive product when they do that. So sometimes you've got to take, for the betterment of the game, take that away from the coaches.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's one game to go in this finals round, and that's this afternoon at 3:10 at Victoria Park. Collingwood playing the Western Bulldogs. The Pies have won their last 3 against the Western Bulldogs by an average of 31 points. So we might get some scoring in this one, Gelding.
Yeah, hopefully. Professor, look, if it's an 8-goal game, 10 goals to 8, that'll be an attractive final. And, I thought the Bullies might be able to redeem themselves today, the Bulldogs. What do you think, Giraffe or Professor?
Well, winning form's good form, Gelding. The Bulldogs have won their last 3. Collingwood have lost their last 2. So you've got a team coming in with some success versus a team who's hobbled into the finals, if you like. Yep.
And, maybe worth just having a look at the game, and hopefully we can see the doggies get up.
You're discounting the home ground advantage, Gelding?
Oh, no. Collingwood, I think, are favourites to win, but, let's hope. Don't always have to back the favourite, Professor.
No, not always, Gelding. All right, Paul, we might turn to rugby league, and those powerhouses of rugby league. Lebanon ran into a bigger powerhouse, Australia.
Well, I sent the meme. I don't know if you got it, Professor. I think I liked it on Twitter, but news just in that Josh Addo-Carr's won the Melbourne Cup, and they had him pictured in front of the horses getting home for the Melbourne Cup prize. He is a very fast player, Josh Adokar. He's about to break all records for number of tries in a World Cup. Lebanon, as you say, aren't exactly a powerhouse unless it comes to producing baklava, but they're not that well known in rugby league, but they've certainly put up a fight. They wanted to take the fight to Australia. They did that, but they were no match for Australia, who is firming into $1.35 to win the whole tournament, with England $6 and New Zealand $7.50. I still stand by England being the real danger at home. The issue for Australia is this: Nathan Cleary's not kicking very well. And we all know you get 4 points for a try, 2 points for a conversion. Given it'll likely be close in the semi-final against New Zealand, and also most likely in the final against England if Australia makes it that far, Mal Meninga's got a tough call on his hands because he's got an exceptional goal kicker in Valentine Holmes, and Latrell Mitchell isn't too bad a sharpshooter either. There's a funny quote. Mal Meninga said that Cleary's been practicing that long. After matches, he's keeping us late for lunch. Now, I would rather be in front of Pamplona Bulls than between Mal Meninga and a big lunch at an English pub. So there's no shortage of practice from Nathan Cleary, but he's going to get the hurry up from Big Mal soon if he keeps skipping on the Yorkshire puddings over there. And that shows how hard Nathan Cleary's working on it. But he may even be overthinking his game. We had an exceptional game in the game of the tournament so far. Those traditional rivals in the true sense, New Zealand and Fiji. New Zealand was very lucky to beat Fiji in that match, and they've progressed through with a late try, and they'll be facing Australia in the semi-finals. That'll be an absolute epic match next weekend, and you're going to have England and most likely probably Papua New Guinea in the other semi-final on the men's side, Professor.
Giraffe, going back to Adokar, and what a fine tournament he's having. And that here is someone that couldn't get in the State of Origin game, couldn't get in the New South Wales State of Origin team, and yet here he is starring for Australia. Can you explain that to the viewers and how that works and why he was overlooked? Why he was overlooked for the State of Origin?
Every try he scores, Freddie Fittler would think he's at teppanyaki with all the food on his face, with the egg on his face. So it is an astoundingly bad decision. Regan Campbell-Gillard was overlooked as well for New South Wales because it was an all Penrith pack pretty much, and he'd left Penrith to go to Parramatta. I tell you this, though, a game that I am looking forward to, not that I'll be awake for it, but 1:30 a.m. tonight, Tonga and Samoa. And I tell you what, they don't like each other too much, and that game is going to be absolutely amazing. So that is probably going to who progresses actually through to the England semi-final. That's going to be a great match at 1:30. There'll be a lot of pride on show there, and that's just in their opening haka equivalent. So that'll be one to watch or follow on the highlights reel.
Gelding, thanks for asking that question about Adokar, because I wasn't going to ask it, given I'd asked it the last 2 weeks of Paul. So I was going to give you a break this week on that one, Paul.
No, well, I tell you, it all looks good for your Bulldogs if we can look ahead to next season with Adokar there, Matt Burton. Apparently there's a big go for Mitchell Moses as well. So if you've got Matt Burton lining up in the halves with Mitchell Moses, Adokar, you've got our favourite Police Academy recruit, Reid Mahoney, coming from Parramatta. So it is looking good for the Dogs next year.
Did I hear that in the golf game last week, Paul, that you had a chat to Matt Duffy?
Yes, I played at the Melbourne Storm Golf Day, and he was on our table afterwards. So he was a good chat. Yeah.
Did he get a word in?
Did you tell him about the slogan that we've got on Sportsfan Radio?
Don't be a nufty, fat Matt Duffy. No, this is another one. That's the barbecue attendee. That was the weekend at Vorney's barbecue one that you're thinking of. This is Matt Duffy, former Storm player, rugby union.
Okay.
Has been playing in Japan. It was quite a good story. He's talking about Japanese rugby union as well. So nothing scandalous. He was very well spoken, the words he got in, and I had a good chat to him.
So who do you like tonight, Paul? Tonga and Samoa?
I think maybe Samoa as an outsider. I tell you, there'd be a lot of passion there, and I wouldn't want to be on that field because those hits are going to hurt. I tell you, there's going to be a very feisty game there. That could turn into WWF.
Final score?
I think 26-22 to Samoa as outsiders.
Well, can I
did want to cover off on the women's game. Australia's doing incredibly well there. The final in just under 2 weeks' time. They're $1.10 favourites, but it's good to see New Zealand and England playing well as well on the women's side. So, they're looking good. They're looking good, and it's a great exhibition that they're both being played at the same time.
Paul, can I just ask about the standard of the World Cup? I'm always interested in national teams. National team of cricketers doesn't really matter because they're all individuals, but a game like rugby league, which totally depends upon the team working together, it's very complicated moves and very quick moves, and a lot of instinctive stuff goes on between players as they get to know each other. When it gets to a national team, they don't play together all the time, or hardly at all. And I just wondered if the Australian team is gelling, and they would appear to be. By the result.
Oh, they are. I mean, these are superstar players. They train together, but as you say, the chemistry often isn't there. But there are some club combinations there, given the majority of players feature from the better teams. So you do have some players picking up on each other. But I think at that level, they're more instinctive. They seem to know where the ball will be, what to do. Mal Meninga doesn't have to do too much because they're superstars. But you're right, there's not necessarily the club connections there that there are at the club level. But Australia's purring along to the fact where they're $1.20 favourites against New Zealand, I'm looking, which quite surprises me because that will be one game to watch. That's next Saturday at 7 a.m. I'll be up for. I'm really looking forward to that game. New Zealand has a habit of springing an upset on Australia at odds.
Okay.
So you got a final score prediction for that game, Paul?
I think Australia's just humming along. And the fact that Daly Cherry Evans, who was our captain and halfback, couldn't crack the starting team shows how much talent there is available. But I have said that before about New South Wales, and we've lost. So I do think Australia will win 22-16 in a tight one. But it wouldn't surprise me if New Zealand would love nothing more than winning that. We know what the Kiwis can do against us when they're fired up.
So that's not a special.
Oh, no, not on that. So I wouldn't be touching the $1.20. Even Daniel Eade, I'd be saying stay away at the $1.20. It's no guarantee.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Judge, you sent an email around during the week about the AFL, dare I say, independent inquiry into the Hawthorn Football Club's investigation. Like to share some of your thoughts with us?
Yeah, look, I think it's turning into a bit of a disaster, this whole thing, Professor. Clearly, Amy, who's one of the chief protagonists, has said that she's not going to participate in the, as you call it, independent inquiry. She says not independent, it's the AFL appointing its own people. Well, I rarely support the AFL, Professor, but I can sort of feel for them in this case in some ways. The allegations have been made. They've been made against AFL coaches and AFL personnel in an AFL setting. It's not surprising that the AFL would then set about trying to establish a tribunal of experts who they would say are culturally appropriate. And to use the words of Amy's lawyer, safe, including the fact that two of them are Aboriginal barristers. And so I just wonder what the AFL is supposed to do. It's been given these most terrible, horrible allegations involving two of its high-profile coaches who have been sent to Coventry for a couple of months while it's investigated. The AFL wants to move things on fairly quickly so they can get a resolution by the end of the year. And at least one of the protagonists, Amy, is saying, I'm not going to participate in this process. Her lawyer made a rhetorical question. What about the coaches whose reputations have been besmirched? What about the presumption of innocence? What is Amy doing to respect their rights? And he answers his own question, nothing. She's doing nothing. They're big boys, white men, with access to every resource they could ever need to pursue and vindicate their rights. Well, I'm not sure if that's helpful to the process. I'm not sure what Clarkson and Fagan are actually supposed to do, other than to participate fully in this inquiry. It's not going very far, and I think this is going to be end very badly.
John, I agree completely with you. There can be no answer to this, because if the AFL come down with the decision and find that these allegations aren't based on any facts that they can find, it'll be, the boys are just looking after the boys. Independently, if they're found to be, statements that were made, well, good, and they're vindicated, and it will then depend on what sanctions the AFL give these coaches. But I'm just wondering what Amy and her solicitors would think if Clarkson and Fagan came out in the paper and made just notorious things about her behaviour without her right of reply or anything like that.
Well, what's happened, Gelding, is that it seems to me that a hand grenade's been thrown into AFL headquarters against two of their coaches and another fellow, and generally Hawthorn Football Club, and then more broadly the AFL. Well, when that hand grenade's been thrown in, well, you have to respond to it. You'd be not fair to her not to respond to it, but because the allegations are not of a crime or a breach of a rule, it's got nowhere to go. And don't get me started, Professor, on the National Sports Tribunal. God, if that thing was ever created for anything, you've got an Aboriginal woman who's got a genuine complaint against people involved at the hierarchy of AFL football, and it's not involved. And despite the fact that it's said to everybody, we'll hear it. We'll hear this tribunal. The fact that nobody wants to go near it just suggests to me that tribunal should pick up the caravan and leave. It's because what it was set up to do, it is just not doing. But because there is no obvious court or tribunal or, perhaps Equal Opportunity Commission, discrimination, human rights organisations perhaps, but there's no obvious place for it to go. And so the whole thing's just meandering. It's becoming lawyers at 20 paces. And that's all they're doing. The lawyers are just arguing with each other. But I can't see any, there's a lot of heat, no light coming out of this whole process.
John, what do you do with something when it's he said, she said, in something where there's no court decision? Well, it just cannot end properly.
Well, I'm not sure if the coaches actually know who's making the allegations. So I don't even know if they know their accuser, nor do they know all of the details of the allegation. The only way they can find that is where the accuser says, okay, it's me, this is the allegation, this is the evidence that I've got. That's how things are done normally. And I just don't see that there's another way of setting up a tribunal or a hearing other than the way it's always been done. And I don't see any guidance being given from Amy as to how she proposes to resolve all of this. The AFL has said they're going to have, additionally to this and separate from this, an inquiry into whether their racism discrimination policies are good enough. They're not, by the way. So that's something, but it's all becoming it's unravelled, Professor, the way I see it.
Could it become a money grab situation, John? Is it a resolution that involves a monetary payment?
I'd be surprised. Look, I know that's been suggested that it's a money grab, but I don't see. I'm confident that she's and the other protagonists are genuine, but I just don't think they're leaving much room for the AFL to resolve it in a way that's going to be satisfactory to her, to them, and to the AFL.
I think the other problem, John, is as I look at it, and I read that article, the AFL, and we're very critical of them in most of the things they do,
yep,
but have tried to put a timeline on it to give some finality to it all, and I can understand that. But when you've got some of the parties saying, "Oh, there's time pressures, we're being rushed, this thing's being raced through," it's a no-win situation. If the AFL take too long to do anything about it, then of course the criticism will be, "Well, hang on, you're trying to drag this out to everybody's detriment." So it's a no-win. I think. Look, if I were the AFL, and I'm not, what I would have said is, okay, we've got to have an independent inquiry and give it to somebody else to look after. And that way it is independent. There's no way it can be independent. If the AFL are organising it and they're selecting who's doing it, then there's always, things might it might seem like it's above board, Judge, but you and I both know justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done.
Yes, yeah, true.
And so that's one of the ways to remove that problem, is that if it's taken out of the AFL's hands, they can't be blamed for how long it's taking or how it's set up.
Yeah, you're right. And the AFL always does things the way it does it, which is to control the process. And Amy clearly wants it to be done independently of the AFL. Subject to the National Sports Tribunal, which has not been involved. And, I don't know what the hell that thing does, but I just can't think of anybody that could truly handle this, because I'm not actually sure what her case or their case actually is, Professor, apart from the fact the allegations are horrible. But I just, in fact, don't know what is the basis of her claim.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a watch this space, and no doubt it will develop over the next few weeks, and I'm sure it won't develop well.
Yep, agreed.
Gelding, the T20 Cup, my first point is anyone watching?
Yes, Professor, I'm watching.
Gelding, on you, you'd say that.
Look, it can be an exciting brand of cricket. You don't have to commit yourself to, a long period of time to watch it. Is it becoming a bit like basketball where you just watch the last 2 overs? I don't know. But yeah, I've found it exciting. And if I take a positive note before a negative note on it, I got to admit, a better game of cricket you will not see, or a better atmosphere of a game of cricket than the other Sunday when Pakistan played India at the MCG for 90,000. We were in the city, Professor, as you know, for a lunch, and to see the groups of Indian and Pakistani supporters, even at lunchtime, the game didn't start till 7 o'clock. They were roaming around South Bank, singing, playing. It was just a sensational atmosphere. So a game like that in the final will make the T20 World Cup a hit. And I really do hope India make the final for that reason, to give it a bit of colour, a bit of a huge crowd and a bit of excitement. And Virat Kohli, well, if he's not the best player in the world, I'll go he, Professor, after that one innings when he won the game for them.
With those fans, it reminds me of my mate who starts on the Guinness at 7 a.m. on St. Patrick's Day, and he's Italian. Yeah, you do like the passion. And
well, it's kind of a bit different from the Barmy Army, the way that they celebrate and get dressed up. And I saw plenty of Pakistan and India supporters even together getting their photographs, and they were all smiling and they were all singing and things like that. It wasn't, let's down 10 pints before we go to the game.
Yeah.
And things like that. They were walking. It was just a joyous type of atmosphere at the cricket.
You're disappointed by one of my favourite players, Glenn Maxwell's comment when Australia was facing almost certain elimination. It doesn't really matter. There's a lot more cricket coming up. We've got internationals and obviously the chance for him to make millions. I was very disappointed in that comment that it doesn't really matter anyway.
Paul, do the Australian cricketers have too much to say rather than just...
Well, I'm not worried that they talk too much. That'd be the pot calling the kettle noisy. But I worry that they don't have as much pride in the jersey as what we hope as fans they should.
And Paul, I was just going to say, that, and I'll probably kicked out of Australian citizenship for it. I was actually happy that Australia got kicked out of the. I think they've now can't make the finals. I'd love to see teams like India, Sri Lanka, and their fans. Their fans are fantastic. They genuinely enjoy the game, both men and women. They're smiling. They're happy. They understand the game. They're real students of the game. Usually, it's their main game that they follow, as I understand it from speaking to Indian people. So it's the new way in Australian cricket is that the fan base is actually mostly from the subcontinent.
John, I
agree with you. Other sports.
John, I agree with you there. An India-England final with the two bands of supporters would be just fantastic. And I saw one of the posters that made me laugh the other day. It was an Indian supporter barracking for England to win so India could beat them in the final. And I thought this guy was jumping up and down for England last night saying, hopefully they get up in the final so we can beat you. It was sensational. I loved it.
Gelding, England versus Australia ended in a draw because the match wasn't played.
Yep.
Why wasn't emergent or reserve dates fixed as they have been in Gelding, as they have been in past tournaments? There's been reserve dates if fixtures can't go ahead on the day. It just seems absurd that you'd run a World Cup where it's decided when all the teams don't play each other.
Professor, I might seek some legal advice from other members on the panel. How do you answer a question that is obviously so right and has so much common sense about it? It's fantastic everyone's involved and all the different cultures and things like that. But there's a game that decides, one side possibly missing out on a final, and a crowd of 60,000. Play it in another venue. If we're washed out in Melbourne, it's only, a 3-hour plane flight to Brisbane or Perth or something like that, and play it the next day.
Imagine the equivalent in a World Cup soccer tournament. Yeah. There'd be a bloody riot.
I don't know why they didn't do it, Professor. I don't know who's running it, whether it's the ICC or whether it's Cricket Australia or a combination of everything. But as you know, we're not big fans of Cricket Australia, the way they've handled cricket over the last couple of years. But this has been planning, like tickets were sold in February, Professor. So surely they could have built in days, and they're professional cricketers these days. So of course they can move around and things like that. The money that they're getting is certainly encouraging them to be that. So, look, for them to be at our beck and call for a month would have been fine, I would have thought, Professor, and reserve days would be included.
Gelding, Australia played Afghanistan. Did you watch that game?
Yes, Professor.
I did too.
Still wondering about the selection.
Well, aside from the selection, Gelding, how does Afghanistan get within 4 runs of Australia, really?
If you have a look at our bowling attack, Professor, and this then goes back for selection, the game before, Mitchell Stark bowling left-hand swingers and that turned the game of cricket by taking 2 wickets in an over. So against Afghanistan, we had Zampa take 3 wickets, and luckily he did in an over that kind of squashed them for a little bit. our attack's right over the wicket, Professor. We took
but Cummings is more expensive than diesel fuel prices at the moment.
Hazelwood, Cummings, Kane Richardson, Stoinis. They bowl the same, don't they, Professor? Why wouldn't you have a big left-hander, you know, one of the quickest bowlers in the world, just as a bit of variety? But, you know, the selectors, in their wisdom, chose that. These are the same selectors. These are the same selectors that couldn't find a spot for Stephen Smith or Cameron Green in the first 4 games. 2 regulars in the Test team. Smith rated in the top 5 batsmen of the world. You know, no qualms about Tim David, Matthew Wade, and Aaron Finch, but I think I'd rather have Steve Smith before all 3 of them in any game of cricket, Professor.
They barely bowled Maxwell as well. He would have been a good change-up as well. He bowls very economically. He knows his way around a 2020 match. So
but going back on the selection, Harbishay, who bats number 3 for Australia, not even in the squad, not even considered, Professor. And these guys are rated in the top 10 batsmen of the world.
Yeah, I just can't see on any day how Afghanistan get within 4 runs of Australia when we're playing any mode of cricket.
Look, we were 20 runs short. Rashad Khan came out at the end, and Rashad Khan played the big bash in here at the Adelaide Oval, and we're playing at the Adelaide Oval. And he's developed a new cricket shot, Professor, called the helicopter. He waves the bat in the air and then takes an almighty swing at it. And it either hits and or he's out early. And the other night, he provided multiple entertainment, hitting 4 sixes in the last 2 overs, Professor, that almost got them there.
He's got more tricks than a Las Vegas magician. I'm waiting for a pigeon to come down the pitch or something. Hopefully not a woman cut in half in the stands. But, he's got a lot of tricks.
His bowling is sensational. He's enthusiastic. He runs around doing the aeroplane after he takes a wicket. He's fantastic. But to watch him bat, Professor, if you're teaching a young kid how to bat, you just say, watch that and do the complete opposite. But he was very successful the other night.
Who do you think will make
Greg Chappell would be just holding his head in shame with the style.
Who do you think will make the final, Gelding?
I'm hoping for I think it'll be India versus New Zealand will be the final, but I am hoping for an India-England grand final just for the crowd response, Professor. Hopefully we get a lovely day like today at the MCG for the final. I think it's a night final. But I reckon it'd just be a tremendous atmosphere, England and India.
All right, Gelding, before we get to today's tips, the 4-day Flemington Carnival's just concluded with Stakes Day yesterday. How did you see the 4 days and how did you go?
Well, Professor, we had extremely good Oaks Day, as we said. Look, the main bet in the Cup I was with Denville Legend, but we had Gold Trip as bit of a saver. But look, we had a good Cup Carnival, Professor. Interesting today. Looking at the crowds, they're saying what a sensational crowd it was. Over 250,000 people flocking to the 4 days, Professor, which is fantastic, but goes back to that theme. I think race clubs are pricing themselves out of the game in most events these days. Like 20 years ago, if they didn't get 100,000 each day, it was regarded as an absolute flop. Here they're talking about 150,000 less people, and they're patting them on the back saying, what a fantastic fantastic feature it is. But I will say, being out of Flemington on Oaks Day, Professor, that new member stand is just absolutely fantastic. And the other clubs have got a little bit to live up to catch up to them. But
I was going to say, if there's any suggestion that the race itself is losing its luster, you've just got to look at Kieran Maher's reaction when he won, the man who's done it all. It certainly means a lot to those in the industry winning that prestigious race.
Well, I suppose when you have a look at the fields, and I'm just going back through it, we're not seeing many Australian-bred horses in it. They're all coming from overseas. Durston won the Caulfield Cup. Gold Trip ran fourth in the Arc. Had only won one race up until the Melbourne Cup, but was laundered as I think it was brought from overseas for well in excess of 2 million Australian dollars. And Gay Waterhouse buying the horse at Who Yarmel, which ran second in the English Derby to try to win the Melbourne Cup, paying well in excess of $1 million as well. But look, I think it still holds its own luster and things like that. People love it. The form of these international horses are becoming better known. So people that are like me that follow the races week in, week out, or people that just want to have the social bet on Cup Day. Now it's good, Professor.
And I see your Richmond Tigers, some of the players have got next year's favourite already lined up.
Yes, the boys are looking rather good in this Chris Waller trained horse, owned by John O'Neill.
Yep.
That put a bid in. Just getting the name here, Solcombe, Professor, which won the Queen's Cup. But I was going to talk about that. There's some spruiks out already for next year's Cup. There was Bruce DeLume that was going to won that race the next year and was going to win the Cup by 6 lengths. So, look, there's always some horses that come out of this carnival. Gay Waterhouse's horse came out, Grey Marlin. It's a big tip. So, yeah, let's wait and see. A long time in racing.
Gelding, of the 24 horses, I think 18 are internationals, and I think you sort of touched on this, but how hard would it be for a handicapper in Melbourne to work out, because the idea of the Melbourne Cup is all 24 horses finish in a line. That's the aim. It's almost an impossible task, isn't it, to be able to properly handicap them?
Look, it's there's trends, John, that kind of come into it. A couple of years ago, you had to have a 3-year-old Northern Hemisphere, which made it 3.5 over here, to run in it. They were getting in, rekindling, and was one they got in with 51.5. DeVille Legend was that profile this year. It was given 55.5. A horse that ran Mullah Ha that I mentioned before, that was that profile. That had 54. So the handicappers are saying, okay, well, look, this was a trend. Now they're hitting them a bit harder and making it harder for them. So, yeah, look, it's Gold Trip had run fourth in an arc over in France, yet had won a maiden race. So, and it's with top weight. And it was the first top weight to win the race since McIvy Dover.
Really?
So, to carry the number 1 saddle cloth. So, it's very, very hard. So, sometimes you get that. There's always horses trying to beat the handicapper, as it's well known, because, as you said, the main aim of a handicap race is to have 24, or in this year's case, 22 horses run across the line together. And they weren't far off. There was a pretty punch field there towards the end.
All right, Gelding.
But very hard job. But also the handicappers know the form of the European horses fairly well.
All right, Gelding, racing today, Ararat Cup Day.
Yes, Ararat Cup Day. But before I get on to that, Professor, can I just say admire the T-shirt of the judge, the Golden Breed brand. I think we all had Golden Breed T-shirts in our teens, didn't we? 15 and 16.
I'm trying to single-handedly bring it back, Professor.
And I do like the Austin Power symbols over his heart, Professor. Very, very good. But John, it's lovely to see the Golden Breed fashion coming back.
I'm sure
I didn't know it was a far right slogan. Sorry.
Sorry. I'm sure you rocked it pretty big in the 70s, Gilly. I just see you in your surfing gear back then.
Yes, with the hair, and the Golden Breed wind cheaters were the things. And then we moved on to Miller and Wrangler shirts, didn't we?
Oh, had them all.
Had them all.
Now we've got the Daniel Andrews North Face.
Yeah. I think we might see.
I'm
John
not here
in a
today
Wrangler
to answer
shirt
questions
next week.
about that.
So, John, can we ask for a Wrangler shirt next week?
For you, if they still make them, I'm going to try and get back into my shirt from 1974, Gelding, but I'll do my best.
Beautiful.
If you want something from my heritage, the Shire in Sydney, I'll have the Carlton Cold Polo shirt.
Oh, beautiful. Sorry for digressing there, Professor, but look, I like Ararat Cup today. Look, not a lot I like today, but we'll go race 2, number 7, Fast Victory for Ben and JD Hayes in race 2. We've got to have a bit of a bet in the main Ararat Cup, Professor, worth 80,000. We'll go race 6, number 3, King's Charisma, trained by the Melbourne Cup winning trainers, Mara and Eustace. And look, Professor, since I emailed you or text this morning, I had a look at the Ararat Bowl where I thought I might have had a runner in it, Professor, but not to be. We've gone race 7, number 14, Do You Punk.
Now, just before you go on to Benella, Gelding, so the horse that you've got an interest in isn't running today. That follows not running on Oaks Day as well. So is your horse making a habit of entering races and not running in them, especially ones that are worth $500,000?
I don't, Professor. I'm trying to come back just for the listeners and John and Paul. The horse I've got a share in, which we have a bit of fun talking about, and we rate kind of John as a midweek type of horse. It actually qualified for a $500,000 race on Oaks Day and got a run in the field. And then I got a text from my trainer, which I thought someone was playing a joke on me. She said we'll be scratching the horse from a $500,000 race, and we'll also be scratching from the Ararat Bowl on Sunday, as we want to get the horses rating up and run in richer races. To which I replied, is there any bigger scene than a $500,000 race during the Spring Carnival? And
Still an Irish trainer.
And I'm still waiting for a reply.
Was that all your text said?
Sorry?
Was that the entirety of your message verbatim?
It's very clean. There was a few bip, 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 bips. I really just didn't believe it. But look, the horse will race in other races, Professor. And if we add up the prize money in all of them, there's no way known it'll ever come to $500,000. So
I hate to break it to you, Gilding. Your tip in the Gold Cup has been scratched to Ararat there today. So King's Charisma mustn't have much at all, charisma. You might want to revisit.
Well, that may well be the trainers that are still recovering from Cup Day.
Yep.
Giraffe. Look, we might go number 7 then, Ashy Boy.
Nice touch. All right. We'll go there.
Okay. Yeah.
And at Benella, Gelding, did you have a...
I had a quick look at Benella, Professor. Didn't like anything, but we might go early in the first in the maiden. Archie Alexander, race 1, number 3. Kumicho. I don't know how. Kumicho. Maybe the giraffe, or you can help me with the pronunciation of that, Professor.
Oh, Paul's across all things linguistic.
And Yeah, our favourite trainer, Mitchell Beer, race 3, number 14, Zuzulai.
All right. Well, we might leave it there today. Thanks, gentlemen, for your participation as always. We've solved the problems of the sports world. And until next Sunday, a good afternoon.